Okay, welcome to Herp Highlights. Oh, there it is.
There you go.
I was like,
Catching you
where's
off
the
guard.
sound? We're guessing the frog call. It's my turn to guess. That is weird, mate.
Yeah.
That's sinister, that is. Oh, a little cheeky squeak. That's a little bit less scary. Is that what animal making those two sounds?
Sounds like one of those wooden. What are those wooden instruments?
Glockenspiel.
Yeah. Yeah, it's got a bit of that, doesn't it?
It does have that, like that. I used to be able to make the noise. I know. Wow. Wow, and it's at least in my ears. It won't probably be in the final recording, but that's in stereo, so it's going from one side to the other. That's mental. Okay, so this is a frog. Can I confirm this is a frog? Is that fair?
I can. No.
Or a toad? It's an amphibian.
And no to toad as well.
I'm really, really struggling with this one.
It is. Where's our paper based today? It's
Well, one USA and one Western Africa.
well, the US one. It's not too far from the species in the US one.
Okay, and it's not an amphibian.
I didn't say that. I said it wasn't a frog or a toad.
Like a salamander.
I didn't say it was a salamander either. But, like, a Sicilian making noises would be...
It wouldn't be like
outrageous.
a siren. A siren? Does a siren make a sound?
I don't know, maybe. I don't
They're
think so.
underwater the whole time and then make it on land. Okay, well, I've got absolutely no idea what this is. Is this an alligator sound? Okay.
No, it's still an amphibian. It's still an amphibian.
Okay, you did say
It
that.
is a type of salamander.
I'm spun out. It's a type of salamander?
Yep.
Okay, well then we'll go for everyone's favourite, the red-backed salamander.
It's not the red-backed salamander. It is the Californian giant salamander.
Wow.
So
and
this is
It's a video.
Dicamptodon ensatus, I guess, is how I'm going to commit to saying that. And when you're talking giant, you're talking like 20 to 30 centimeters, including the tail.
I mean, I can see in the video it's taken up most of that road.
Well, so they're monstrous. Yeah. That make these bizarre noises.
Why is it making this sound? Has someone upset it?
I don't know. On the Amphibia website, it says little is known about the biology of the terrestrial adult.
Wow,
Information on mating and courtship is not available.
That's probably my all-time favourite amphibian sound that we've had. It's just so crazy.
Kind of awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, no, it's okay. It does say on Amphibia Web that it tends to be a defensive noise. Okay. So this is an agitated salamander by
I thought so.
What we're hearing.
Okay, yeah. So, but that's crazy. I mean, like, it sounds coming from its mouth, presumably. But yeah, that's wild. Very, very, very cool. All right, so it's still 3-2, Ben. I'm still winning, just so we've got that on record. I can't remember which ones anyone got, but yeah, it continues to be the toughest of all games.
I mean, for us, I'm sure.
But
experts in Californian giant salamanders found that one easy peasy.
Yeah, maybe if you pick them up, they do it. So maybe people would recognize it. Like frogs make that release call when you hold them. That little.
Right.
You must remember that from your childhood. You must have squeezed a frog or two in your time.
I've never squeezed a frog to the point of it screaming back in response.
You don't have to squeeze them hard. You just pick them up and they do it.
You just crush them like a dog toy, right?
No, yeah, no. Oh, I was always very gentle with the frogs. So we're obviously, you said, you gave me the clue that we had another paper to do with this location. I've got a little clue as to what we're going to be talking about next, actually. Oh.
Oh.
You know what that is.
Okay. I see. Okay, I see where you're. I mean, it's not much of a clue because I know what we're going to be talking about.
Oh yeah, no. For the listeners, Ben, don't break the fourth wall. So, yes, we're talking about rattlesnakes. So we're doing a paper on rattlesnakes. We're also doing another paper on ball pythons, royal pythons. We're doing a sort of a snake sociality double bill because increasingly it turns out snakes are social animals. It's just hard sometimes to work out what that actually means to snakes,
Right.
because they're not meeting up for coffee. They're not having sort of gang-related violence. They're not doing a lot of the things which you would think of people doing. A lot of their sociality is probably concealed with simple smells, which we can't actually decipher without really thinking carefully about it. But there are
also
increasingly
having the equipment to detect that, I think, is also a kicker, isn't it? It's operating on a level that's not easily observable by our own senses, right?
Yeah, no, our sense of smell is a joke, and I don't know if we'd be able to taste the pheromones in the quantities that they're produced in, but we wouldn't want to. Anyway, but yeah, there's a lot more.
Go around licking some rocks to see if rattlesnakes have been over them. Yeah, no thanks.
Rattlesnake was here. That'd be absolutely insane. I mean, like, herpetologists do have a tendency to be a little bit strange. We love that. That's part of it. But if I was out with someone who was licking rocks to work out where rattlesnakes were, there'd be some questions. I'd be hoping it wasn't just me and them. Yeah. So we got a load of stuff about snake sociality. I was really impressed. We'll introduce papers in a minute, but I was really impressed when reading the introduction of the second one, just how much snake sociality literature there is to draw upon these days. Like, when we started the podcast, almost none of this stuff existed, with the exception of one of these two papers. But now there's loads of stuff. You got the sea snakes hunting in packs. You got those Cuban boas seemingly hunting in packs.
Yep.
You got garter snakes hanging around with their pals, behaving more boldly when they're in groups, exploring together, meeting up with their friends at the den sites. Yeah, there's a real wealth of literature now. And we're going to roll back the clock to one of the first ever papers to talk about. Well, not, yeah, it's an early one.
I would be very cautious making sort of, that's opening yourself up to, but actually, sort of comments there.
I overstepped, Ben. I deserve that. No, I overstepped.
Yeah,
it was the 70s people started talking about snakes. sorry. So, yeah, it was the 70s people started talking about it and sort of garter snakes and stuff. And there's a few, there's that paper where they put the Indian pythons in a group and they put 4 males in with 1 female and basically created the perfect python thunderdome. They were all competing over 1 female, and they observed that there was a sort of linear hierarchy from biggest to smallest python or something along those lines. So yeah, this isn't one of the first, but I'd say this is one of the ones which sort of hit the news and made people start to consider it a bit differently. So this one was by Clark, Brown, Stechert and Greene, 2012, Cryptic Sociality in Rattlesnakes, Crotalus, horridus, detected by kinship analysis, published in Biology Letters. And yeah, you heard the rattle of the Crotalus horridus, which is the timber rattlesnake. Really beautiful, quite big one.
Not the horrible rattlesnake, then.
No, they're not horrible. They're wonderful.
Despite horridus.
I know, yeah. Does that just mean horrible? Does it mean something else? I don't know. Horridus.
I don't know. I feel like it's the species epithet for grizzly bear as well, off the top of my head. But I might be misremembering that.
Grizzly bear?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I'm not sure if that's right.
Or is that terriblest?
Apparently it means it might be terriblest. Yeah. I don't know. But apparently it's borrowed from the Latin word horridus, literally, and it means rough, bristly, savage, shaggy, or rude. So maybe it's because of their lack of manners that they got this name.
Lack of manners. And just
yeah.
as it is the subspecies epithet for grizzly bears. Well,
nice,
I mean,
nice.
horribilis. Horribilis.
Horribilis.
Similar. It's similar.
Okay.
It's probably got similar implications.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's definitely similar.
Impolite animals, so we can go with, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's honestly quite polite of a rattlesnake to warn you, your pit vipers elsewhere in South America, so a lot of them don't, well, and in Asia, a lot of them don't have the common decency to rattle.
Yeah.
They'll just bite you if you're in there. Well, usually if you tread them. But yeah, I think it's quite polite to give a warning. But yeah, this paper, they were looking to see whether or not rattlesnakes were hanging around together, if they were sort of socializing in groups, and whether or not that socializing, whether or not that sort of spending time together was related to them being family. So if they actually shared, if them relating with each other was related to them being related. And they did that with a bunch of genetic analysis. So they looked at some little snips of the DNA, and they were looking to see whether or not they were more likely to be hanging around with ones they were related to, despite the fact that they are, at this time, particularly in 2012, rattlesnakes were still considered to be pretty much asocial, just solitary reptiles. And it was known that they'd sort of meet up and den together. So when they hibernate, they go to these communal dens and all hibernate in one spot. But I think prior to this, it was kind of always assumed by most people that that was something which was only really related to the fact that it was a resource they collectively wanted to use.
It's just sort of incidentally that they were all there maximizing access to that best resource, and so there wouldn't be any patterns.
Yeah, exactly. But what they found with this study was that both juvenile and also pregnant timber rattlesnakes choose to spend time aggregated, so collected together with their relatives. So they're more likely to be aggregating with other rattlesnakes, which they are related to. But other aggregations didn't have this same sort of preference. So, there are known to be benefits to aggregating together. If you're in a group, you have better ability to see predators, especially with something like a rattlesnake. They actually do like a visual and auditory warning, so that they can alert each other very well to threats. But also, there's things like it's better to thermoregulate all together. You have like more thermal mass if you're larger, and also if snakes are all sort of coiled up together, they have a better ability to hold in their water. They lose less water through evaporative water loss. And so, this is kind of a really cool paper showing that there is a little bit of complexity to the social lives of timber rattlesnakes. We got a nice picture in the video of the timber rattlesnakes. They really are a cool looking one. This like town background with these dark brown blotches and quite variable. Some of them have got like black heads and some of them have got brown heads. They're really, really cool. But yeah, I don't think there's much more really to say about this, is there, other than they were sort of aggregating with their kin a little bit.
Exactly. It's just that sort of connection, between kin and sort of between sort of generations of kin. If you're looking at the sort of pregnant female side of things, which I think, I don't know, it does speak to. They highlight it. So the paper we're about to go on to, they highlight a couple of papers discussing sort of hatchling care, essentially, and how young snakes are picking and choosing where to go, and whether that's connected to what they're learning from the previous generation kin. And it does strike me that this Clark paper is very much hinting at that, right? You've got similar sort of cohorts sticking together. You've got this connection with the sort of previous, the females sort of gravitating together and maybe using better use of areas, or because that's a more vulnerable time, potentially using that social connection for their own protection, potentially. It's one of those ones that sort of opens a lot more questions. Like pretty much, I think I say that about every damn paper we read. But point stands, right?
Yeah, change the record, mate. But no, you're totally right. It does. Like, it really is. And I think, yeah, at least for me, this was one of the ones that opened my eyes. Because I remember being a kid and people would be like, oh, usually it was like, because you've got pet reptiles and they're kept solitarily, generally speaking.
Right.
And so people would be like, oh, are they happy by themselves? And you're like, well, yeah, they're asocial completely. They're just like solitary animals. And, like, I guess a captive setting is a captive setting, but yeah, it's now a lot more of a complex picture about whether or not they do have social lives, and it's something which we're sort of starting to untangle and work out means of actually untangling as well.
Yeah, I think that's probably the segue to the second paper is that captive context question, right? Because we're just talking about rattlesnakes in a very wild context and then roaming around and choosing to do it themselves. But flip that to royal pythons, which I don't know where they sit on the list of most kept captive animals, but they've got to be up there.
Yeah, for sure they're up there. I think they're probably the most commonly kept snake, I would argue.
Yeah.
Maybe the only one that's really in competition with me is corn snakes. A lot of people have boas, but they're bigger. They're a lot more impractical. Mm-hmm. So I think royal pythons are probably the number one, or ball pythons as they're sort of called elsewhere. And yeah, so let's introduce the paper. It's by Skinner, Kumpan, and Miller, 2024. Intense sociability in a non-social snake, Python regius. Behavioral Ecology and Sociobiology was the journal. And this social behavior is intenso, according to the title of the paper. And no, but yeah, as you were saying, I think, yeah. You got any royal pythons in your life, Ben? Do you know any? Do you get the opportunity to stroke them, hold them?
I'm pet and reptile starved.
Yeah, that's rough, man. I've got a few friends that have got these. Yeah, all different color ones. My mate Steve's got one. What's his name? His name's Rhaegar, and he's one of the spider ones. Of the inner ear thing.
Yeah.
He's a little bit of a wobbly boy.
Okay.
And yeah, Alexia, who I think she's got one called Car. He's cool. And then my friend Dev's got one called Peach, who is actually pink. It's a pink and orange snake, which is really cute.
I mean, if they're not the most popular, I think just you really got multiple individuals that you're aware of. Goes some way to supporting that, I feel.
Yeah. But yeah, so
and these are captive
I think
snakes in this study too, worth pointing out.
That's right. Yep, they were all sourced from breeders, and they used kind of like juvenile to sort of small subadult snakes in this study. I think they mostly actually fell in the browns. Juveniles, acquired from breeders, and yeah, they were doing some lab-based studies on these captive royal pythons. So, like you say, different from the previous study, which was wild rattlesnakes. And royal pythons also differ from rattlesnakes and other species which generally have been used in this sort of social context, because like vipers, which a lot of the social stuff is to do with, they give birth to live young.
Right.
And they also den communally, and so do garter snakes do both of those things as well. So yeah, royal pythons are different in that they don't hibernate as a collective. I mean, I'm not even sure if they really have a hibernation period. They might get a bit less active, but
yeah, I would hit on the sort of climatic differences more than the oviparous, viviparous egg laying stuff. Personally, I feel like that's more intriguing because it changes the sort of spatial composition of where you can use and at what times of year, right? You're not sort of forced into these areas of like, well, if I don't get to this spot that stays adequately warm through the winter, I'm in a tight situation, and that being more limited, I feel could drive these sort of aggregations and then maybe sociality off the back of that, because you have to sort of make peace in some way because of the limited resources. But that's also assuming that just, that the climate stuff shifts the resources, when really resources could be limited by other things, by aridness or anything that's not thermoregulatory but limited in other ways. So
yeah, I agree with you that it is cool because if they are socializing, there's a less clear reason as to why. But yeah, I think giving birth to live young is kind of that too, isn't it? Where if you've just given birth to something, it's right there for you to socialize with immediately. And a lot of these things are the one about the other pythons that, I mean, I think, to be fair, I do think real pythons do sit on their eggs, so they probably do still have that opportunity. Well, that's exactly
sort of what I'm feeling
here.
with snakes that are, with the eggs for a protracted period. I don't see that it necessarily needs to be a breakdown, and also there are some unbelievably social creatures that lay eggs. Look at all these birds.
Yeah.
The eggs don't limit there.
Very true.
Okay, they don't have as precocial young necessarily, but that might be what's actually more intriguing, is the sort of precocial. What's the opposite of precocial?
Antisocial? Asocial?
One of those. Either way, the one where the young needs some.
What's behind door number 3?
Basically, might be a better place to look for what's driving sociality. I don't know.
But let's talk about this study that they did on the royal pythons in the lab. So they had a bunch of them. I think they had 30 little pythons.
Yep, 30 individuals.
Yeah, and they wanted to test them in a couple of different ways to see if they were sort of sociable. One of the things they did, so they wanted to see if they were sort of social individually. And so what they did was they plonked the python down on its own in a tank. And inside that tank is 2 hiding places. One of the hiding places just smells like a generic, what do they call it? It's like whatever they use to mix up the fat smell that they used in the other one. So it's like a control.
Some base lipid.
It doesn't really smell. Yeah, some just thing. And then in the other one, they had the smell of a royal python, which is heavily concentrated python scent. And the way that they obtained this is absolutely disgusting. They basically collected shed skins from a zoo, mashed them all up into a paste, and then they squeezed it super tight. So all the fat dripped out. And then they isolated that into a little drip drop bottle, and then they dripped it on something.
Yeah, it's
and
just like making olive oil, right? Get the olives,
it's just
olives, get the oil. Delicious.
Yeah. So if you want, you could probably make your own snake oil at home if you've got a load of shed skins and
selling it would be
desire to produce that smell. Yeah. I don't think there are many uses for it.
I was more thinking just the idea of being a snake oil salesman comes with some baggage, doesn't it?
Yeah. What was the original snake oil like? I know it's like a sort of famous example of, it's just like the generic way of describing that someone's a.
I think it was just like a medicinal sort of cure-all sort of thing, right?
Okay, so it wasn't like I can keep snakes away from you with this magic oil. It was, this is oil from a snake that will cure your tuberculosis.
I mean, if you go and buy the cure-all, if you didn't want to be near snakes, that would potentially be a malady. So.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But yeah, so they were testing to see whether or not they were more likely to go under this hide, which had the smelly snake oil under it.
Right.
And those results were a bit inconclusive, really. The snakes didn't really seem to care about that. They didn't consistently either go under it or not go under it. They seemed to just go for a hide. So they didn't seem to be just seeking out the generic smell of another royal python when seeking shelter. And so that was the individual test, which was okay, not really sure whether or not they're being social or not here. And then they moved on to a group experiment. So they split their royal pythons. They split them into 5 groups of 6. And they were looking to see whether or not they were essentially aggregating together under certain shelters when given the opportunity.
Yeah, so you've got an experimental setup with a lot of different shelters as options, right? That's the environment they're placed in.
Yeah. And one thing they noticed, which I thought was quite cool, was that they seemed to quite early on pick a sort of home shelter that they considered to be their shelter,
the best
which they would sort of frequently return to, which is quite a nice little idea that they'd sort of select a home base where they would feel safe and kind of go back to. And I'm sure that people who've kept reptiles, like many of them will have lots of options of places to go, which kind of on the face of it seem relatively similar, but they'll sort of select one that
They'll
seems
have a
to be their
preference.
like favorite. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've all got a favorite place to sit.
Exactly.
Totally
it's a very
relatable.
reasonable animal response to any environment, right? So you build up familiarity, and then you sort of build up sort of familiarity of other places from there, right? You sort of build outwards.
Yeah, and then they kind of built on this, looking at the sociality thing. And one thing they were interested in was if a python enters a shelter and there are already snakes in there, do they spend more time there? And that was a yes. If they go to a shelter where there are already snakes in there, they'll spend more time in that shelter than if they entered it and they were alone in there.
And if there are more
snakes,
snakes,
a bit of sociality,
longer time spent, right?
And that increases with more snakes. Yeah. So basically, the more the better. And then, like I said, they didn't seem to show preferential associations with other specific animals. So they didn't seem to have like specific friends that they would come and go.
I think there was a lizard study we covered ages and ages ago, which I've completely forgotten what species or the entire context, but I remember there being like groupings in networks that we've covered similar studies like this. And the fact that they don't see that in this, I was a little bit surprised by, to be honest. I wasn't expecting, I mean, skipping to the chase of them all preferring to be together most of the time for several of the cohorts.
Yeah.
Like all of the snakes
and that is actually
in one shelter.
Yeah, and that is actually new information for royal pythons. There were no reports of like stable aggregations in this species, and they're all kind of like getting together. And as we sort of talked about at the top, we were saying that this is something which we know from garter snakes and rattlesnakes, but this species which doesn't have such an obvious reason to get together and socialize, they do seem to form these like big aggregations under hides. We said earlier, social contact reduces water loss, dilutes risk from predators, especially if they're like vulnerable. Like these are small pythons, so there are therefore that many more predators that could eat them. And they seem to be strongly attracted to conspecifics, as in other pythons. So they were sort of now and again, they would go into the tank where the group was, and they would do what they called the python shuffle, and they would like shuffle them around. And these results were consistent. They'd like go back into groups once they'd been shuffled around.
Is a slight question there that a couple of the cohorts didn't spend nearly as much time all together as the others. So two of them, it wasn't as common to have all the snakes together in one place, and even one of them had one individual that had a tendency not to group with the others. But it is seeming like the overall sort of picture is that there is very much a willingness to prefer, very much a preference to prefer being with other individuals in shelter sites. Which also strengthened over time, which I thought was quite interesting too. Like that measure of sociality increased as the experiment went on. So that might be a familiarity thing potentially.
Yeah, and the ones which were shown to have this like stronger effect of wanting to go in the shelter with other snakes were the ones that were known to be unrelated to each other. So I don't know whether there's any significance in that. Like maybe they're more inclined. I don't know. I don't think you can quite say that they're more inclined to hang out with other ones that they're not related to. But yeah, 1 and 2 were known to be not related. 3, 4, and 5, those groups were known. They weren't sure how related they were. So there's some sort of question marks there. They are, it's also worth reminding folk that they are juvenile snakes, which, if we refer back to the previous paper we just covered, juveniles were showing a different sort of social aggregation dynamic compared to other individuals in the population. So this might not be something that they do over their entire lives. No.
But I don't know. I think it's
there are some.
It's something to keep an eye on, isn't it?
Yeah, there are some cool things. They aggregate in groups. They seem to have a home base. I mean, these are novel things for royal pythons. And this, like, I don't know. Yeah, this is kind of one of those ones where it's like very much the beginnings of more. It's the first time royal pythons have really been used in an experiment like this.
Yep.
And as you say, they're all juveniles. I mean, I'd imagine like of all the snakes, you could probably quite easily gather up a whole load of royal pythons and put them in a massive exhibit and just do this experiment on a bigger scale.
For sure. I think you're still going to have that captive element question to it.
Yeah.
But, not to say that that's not valuable to answer, but more just scaling this up isn't going to get you all the way to the end, and that would require a whole heap of effort just scaling it up. So
yeah, lots of tracking of wild ones. I think there is some evidence of them denning, or like they're found in dens, like not dens, but like in holes or whatever, I guess maybe termite mounds, together in the wild. But we just don't know really anything about
just need
how those animals are related,
data on it.
Yeah, or whether or not they're sort of like going away and coming back. And it's all these questions that just need to be answered with really intensive tracking of snakes in the wild, which is really, really hard to do.
Yeah, I think this would, these sorts of questions are particularly hard from a tracking perspective too, because, so you need enough individuals tracked in the population to catch those interactions, unless you're using your tracked individuals and checking up on them and sort of disturbing them routinely to see if they're hanging out with other snakes that are untracked. Which
and you can't really,
that's going to have a massive impact on their behavior. So very difficult.
And you can't really use GPS very easily on these because they're underground a lot, and radio tracking that many would just be super tough. So
I don't know. I wonder whether you could do it with artificial shelter sites or something like that, and you just go in and you'd just tag individuals. That way, not active tracking, but just mark and recapture in that way.
Yeah, or just have like pit tags and then have readers on the entrances. Yeah, that's a sick idea.
If they're willing to use artificial or modified or I suppose they don't have to be artificial. You could just set up those detectors in known good shelter sites for them, potentially.
Yeah, you'd have to make sure they only had one entrance or an exit
that
so
would
that
be
you could actually reliably scan them.
That would be nightmarish. So artificial
imagine termite
would kind of have to be, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Termite mounds are going to have like just so many holes, I would have thought.
Yeah, that's impossible.
So really, conclusion, keep your secrets, royal pythons.
Not impossible, but difficult.
We'll find out one day how social you really are. But there we go.
You could do it with passive. Sorry, you could do it with radio tracking if you set up like just small passive detectors that would just pick up the signal and just say, okay, it's within, 5 meters or something like that, and treat that as in the termite mound. And you stick your radio receiver. It would cost a lot because you would have to have a lot of radio receivers, but radio receivers per shelter site, and then just pick it up when they come nearby.
Yeah. But I mean, they're quite big and fat. You can stick a tag in them,
right?
But yeah. So we've been talking about a very popular pet reptile here, and we're going to talk about another popular pet reptile, something a little bit controversial happening in the world of milk snakes next. There's been a new paper come out all about how we can determine what are different species. And it's a new statistical method, quite high tech. Who's it by? Kornai et al. And it came out just the end of last year. And essentially the idea behind this, something we talk about quite a lot, is that species descriptions currently, sometimes they're based on slightly shaky DNA evidence. Sometimes they seem to authors will often it's because of, limitations in money and stuff like that, but often there won't be sort of adequate testing of the genetics of animals all the way across the range. So you might have like an individual from a population here and then an individual from a population 200 kilometers away, and those two will be tested, and it's like, oh, they're different. But you didn't really test the intervening 200 kilometers to see if there's actually just a gradient between those two things,
Right.
and they actually kind of all mix and they're one species. So there's a little bit of like selectiveness in this, and something which I think from reading this paper, I'm no expert in this, and it's very complicated maths that sort of underpin this study. But it seems as though prior to this, when we're delimiting species, so deciding what are species, gene flow and migration isn't really incorporated very well. And that seems to be what this new method is really good for, is incorporating gene flow and migration into models which determine what are species and what aren't. And that should help distinguish sort of this continuous geographic variation from actual species boundaries that are like relevant conservation units that we actually should justifiably care about, rather than just inflating the number of species in the world because it's fun to talk about new species.
Yeah.
And so, one of they used a few examples in the paper. They did giraffes, they did sunfish,
the
which
classic giraffe split, which I was talking about the other day and couldn't remember where people had sort of landed on it.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't remember now. You know what did they decide about the giraffes?
Well, that's what I was just looking, and they show two sort of separate sort of decisions. I'm not seeing which one is being suggested as the
what's really confusing?
To go with
my one complaint about this paper is that they call the result which tends to have more splitting the merge result, and the split result is the result which has more merged species.
Right, which is to do with the underlying process, not the output, right? Like that
makes it very confusing. When all you're doing is looking at the pictures, that makes it very confusing.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it seems to be this has been really well received by people who know more about this stuff than I do. So the giraffes, it looks as though giraffes are either 5 species or 3 species, depending on... And currently right now, it's considered that they're 5 species.
Right.
The result which is more conservative would put the sort of northern 3 species, so that's what?
The sort of
Rothschildi,
reticulated
Rothschild group.
I don't know what.
Peraltas?
I don't know what that one is.
Yeah, but basically the sort of northern ones from the northern half of Africa really would all be 1 species, and then you'd have the other 2 species split in the south and the east. But anyway, that's giraffes. Don't know why we care about giraffes. Well, obviously giraffes are important, but not for this podcast.
The point is to show that it's working in multiple different contexts, right? That's why we care about giraffes.
Yeah. And they also did sunfish. Sunfish, apparently, they're a species of fish which lives in America and Mexico, North America and Mexico, and apparently their taxonomy has been very controversial. But they suggest that actually it shouldn't be. They're all 1 species. Move on.
Right.
Both their models suggest that, which I quite
that's
like.
the merge and the split way of going about it, saying exactly the same thing, which is I guess a lot of support.
And then I guess so, yeah. And then let's get on to the milk snakes. That's why we came. So milk snakes at the moment. Recently, I can't remember when it was. It was it in 7 species were proposed back in 2014, but then there was a sort of more modern effort by Chambers and Hillis in 2020 that cut it down to 3. Back in the day, in 1988, Williams suggested it was just 1. And interestingly, in this new paper, essentially, if you're conservative, then it's just 1 species, Lampropeltis triangulum, all the way across the range. So that incorporates Polyzona, Abnorma, Micropholus, Annulata gentilis, Triangulum, and Ellipsoides. But the sort of more adventurous, what they call the merge result, even though it's kind of more splitty, is 3 species. So 3 species is kind of the sort of justifiable maximum. And that is Lampropeltis polyzona, which incorporates Polyzona, Abnorma, and Micropholus.
Yeah, that's your sort of Central America,
Triangulum,
Mexico, top of South America, right? If I'm reading the map right.
And then you've got Yeah, and then you've got triangulum, which is kind of the sort of eastern ones from, well, not ellipsoid, it's sort of more northern, actually, isn't it? Yeah, it's the sort of more northern and eastern, northeastern USA, which is like annulata, gentilis, triangulum, all become triangulum. And then there's ellipsoides, which is just ellipsoides, which is the one which is from sort of the southeast America, sort of like Florida and the counties that border, the states that border Florida to the north.
Yeah.
So, So, yeah, like you say, a sort of Central American one, a northern one, and a southeastern USA one, which all looks quite sensible, really. Like I say, I don't understand the maths behind this, but it seems that a lot of people are enjoying the new method and praising it. So take that.
I think that's all we really wanted to sort of say on it is that there's updates to milk snake stuff that's sort of pushing it the ways you just described. New method that I suppose folk that are working in that space would be good to be aware of. And
this is a popular snake as well. I think there'll be a lot of milk snake aficionados who are trying to see them all. And like the likelihood is that if you've seen a few, you can probably chill now.
Well, I mean, if you're going with their split algorithm result, job done.
Yeah, but this is regardless of where you delineate the species, this is a group which has a lot of morphological variation. Like there's a lot of variation in pattern.
Right.
So yeah.
That's the thing. So now you're questioning whether you're seeing what's your motivation for finding these different snakes? Is it to find cool different morphs and see them all out in the wild, or is it the species checkbox? Yes, I have seen that species, job done.
Yeah, I guess that depends on the individual. You've got the bird watching approach, which is like just go down the cul-de-sac with 1,500 other birders to tick it off, or try and see them all. But yeah, I like this. I don't know. Yeah, I think this is probably. It's difficult to know when you first see things come out whether or not this is a method that's going to be adopted by other people. I guess part of that depends on how easy it is to implement.
I was just about to say, I think the kicker usually is if it's actually reasonably straightforward to do without having to sort of. Oh, I'm going to sound kind of rude to authors that don't do it, but if methods have, or if authors have gone that sort of extra step to make things quite easily exportable and redoable for other people, so they don't have to keep coming back to those original authors to sort of get something working exactly the way it should. I see that as from a personal perspective, that tends to be how you learn new methods, right? If you can get your hold of one, you can read one that makes sense and is nicely described. To be fair, this one's nicely described in a bulky paper here with nice case studies. So that's step one, absolutely done. But whether you can then actually have a way of implementing it reasonably straightforward, that you can sort of toy around with it with those case studies, see how it's working. I don't know. I think that's a really important thing with sort of new methods is giving people the tools to mess with it in a space that you've demonstrated the results, so they can see that when they run it, they're either getting the same or different, or what happens when I tweak this aspect, which I think I understand because it's been described, but actually what does it do to the results sort of thing? You need your sort of sandbox like environment, I feel, a lot of the time to really get people to use
exactly. So there we go. Potentially just 3 species of milk snake in the genus Lampropeltis there. Obviously there are other snakes in the genus Lampropeltis, but just 3 of these, the milky ones. Have you got anything else, Ben, or is that it?
I think that's it for me. Yeah. No, I think we're good.
Same here. So yeah, if you want to get in touch with us, you can, herphighlights@gmail.com. If you want to be a patron, support the podcast on Patreon, patreon.com/herphighlights. We'll send you a sticker. We'll send you a sticker just for joining. And we've got a patron selected episode coming up next time, I think. And yeah, if you want to follow us on Instagram, herp_highlights. I'm Tom Major. That's Tom_E_Major. I think all that remains to be said is thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.